Well, hello, hello, and welcome to another episode of Glorious Life on Wheels. As most of you know, I have been traveling with Lindy, and we are now at incredible tiny homes in Tennessee. Lindy has gone off. She's gone to Gatlinburg and going to be doing some filming there, while I'm doing some interviews here. In this video, I'm going to share with you some of our experiences. Oh my goodness. The first couple days were very difficult. And I want to do a video that I think will be helpful to those of you who might decide to travel with another person. If you're someone who typically travels alone, which I do, I either travel alone or with my daughter or with one of my brothers, particularly my younger brother. So we kind of know how we travel. We know what to expect. We don't have any surprises. But if you're usually a solo traveler and you're taking a trip with someone else, even if you're really good friends, there are some things that you really need to do so that the first couple of days of your trip won't be like hell on earth. I mean, whoo! But we worked it out. But there are some things we should have done in advance, and I want to share with you what those things are and help you in case you're planning a trip with another friend across the country. All right, come on, I'm going to give you those tips to hopefully help you have an easy first few days and ease into that trip without some of the challenges that we had. I hope you can see me all right. I had to sit a little bit in the shade because it's really quite hot out here. But let's get right to it, shall we? And let's talk about some of the things that you really, really must discuss and consider before taking a trip with someone. Even if they're a close friend, you have to consider these things and take them into account. Number one, you need to know and consider the differences in personalities. That's going to impact the way you handle your entire trip. I was talking to Lindy the third night when we kind of reached a groove and we kind of knew what we were doing and we had communicated better and we had a better understanding. But on that third night, we were sitting down and I said to her, you know, we're kind of like the odd couple. And she goes, yeah, you're Felix and I'm Oscar. And I thought, yeah, that's exactly it. I like to plan. I like to know what's happening. And there are surprises that come up, but I like to know that I have the preparations in place that if a surprise comes up, I can handle it. And Lindy is more a shoot from the hip. Let's just go. Let's just do it. And we'll deal with it when it comes up. So that is okay and fun, as a friendship. But when you're on the road, it can present some challenges. Now, I'll share one of them with you. We originally were planning on going for a month. And things changed where we could only go for 2 weeks because, as it turned out, we were going to go after my daughter was back in school past the summer. So, as many of you may know, my daughter's on the spectrum. She's autistic. And she had an extremely hard time, like most kids did, with the pandemic, being away from her friends for over a year and then going back only for a week to graduate and not see them again. It was really hard. Well, she's now in a different program. She's made new friends, and I just couldn't be gone for a month right when she was starting back and have to miss a month again. It was just going to be too hard. So we cut our trip down from a month to 2 weeks. Now, when we initially were going to be gone for a month, we were planning to do 300 miles a day. No big deal. You have forever to get where you're going because you have got a whole month. But when you cut a trip down to 2 weeks and you're going 2,500 miles one way, you're not going to be able to go 300 miles because by the time you get there, all you're going to have time to do is turn around and go back. So we had discussed in length that we were going to be going 500 miles per day. And I mapped it out, got the trip ticks, a book that with the trip ticks, gave one to Lindy. I had one. And we just kind of went over it. And then in that morning, the morning that we left, we talked again about we were going to be going 500 miles. And we talked about where we were going to end that day. And it's in the triptych. Each place we were going to stop at each day for the night was in our book, mapped out everything. What I didn't realize until later, and Lindy told me this later, was for some reason, even though we talked about it more than one time, she still in her mind was stuck on, we're going to go 300 miles. And so when we get going and we're headed out, and I'm on the mindset, okay, we're going to go 500 miles. She's on the mindset, we're going to go 300 miles. Well, you can see where this is leading. And then, and I'll talk about this later. Lindy, I think she said she drinks 6 quarts of water every day. I don't drink 6 quarts of water every day. And even if I did, me and Cuddles, my dog, we're like camels. You know, we can go 2.5, 3 hours. So typically, I like to go until we hit a place where we need gas up, get back on the road and go again, unless we're going to stop at some sightseeing place or something else. With Lindy drinking 6 quarts of water per day, Lindy's got to stop every hour. You know, so we would stop, get gas, then maybe 20 minutes later we'll stop for her to have a bathroom break. Then maybe an hour or so later, we'll stop for gas. Then, so you can see how this is going. And as this is going along, I'm getting more and more frustrated because I'm looking at the mileage and I'm thinking, we're not even going to make 300 miles at this point. We'll be lucky to make 250 miles in one day. And I'm thinking, extrapolating that out, 250 miles. So I'm like, you know, trying to push, let's go a little further. And she's like wondering, well, what's the rush? And I'm thinking, because we got to get there in 5 days. We had talked about, we have 5 days to get there. We're leaving on the 26th and we're going to get there by the 30th. So when you divide 2,500 into 5, that's 500 miles. But again, that's not resonating. And you know what? This has happened to me. I have said one thing and verbalized it, but in my mind, I'm thinking something else. I mean, it's happened more than one time. I mean, it just happens. And I've experienced this. And I didn't realize that was what was going on with Lindy until maybe the 3rd day. And she was like, it just didn't register. Now I get it. So you need to really make sure that each party really, even though you say it, make sure each party really understands what the plan is and what they have agreed to. And then I think each person needs to really be realistic. Is this realistic what I've agreed to? For me, going 500 miles a day, I can do that easily. Make sure you communicate and each of you understand what the plan is, but also make sure what your expectations are and what your needs are as far as stopping. If one of you needs to stop every hour and the other only wants to stop every 2.5 to 3 hours, you've got to come together and compromise. The third thing is, how are you going to communicate? Now, on was it the first or the second day, I was leading. First, after we first started out, I told Lindy, I said, you know what, you have to stop a lot more than I do, and we don't have walkie-talkies, and I can't call you, and I'll get to that later. And since I can't, why don't you lead, because you know when you're going to need to stop. I don't. So you lead and you stop when you need to stop. But if we could try and do it, so we do a few more stops or more stops at gas stations, you know, as opposed to stop for gas and stop to pee, stop for gas, if we could do it that. And she said, well, you know, I really like to see some of the rest stops. And I said, fine, you know, that's fine. But if we could do kind of a combination. And I'm glad we did stop at rest stops, because one of the most beautiful places that we saw and scenic places was that rest stop in Wyoming. So, you know, both of you have things to add that will benefit the trip. But back to communication, and this is partly my fault, because I had said initially, you know, I've got walkie-talkies and we can use those. But I couldn't find them. I bought them like a year or two ago and never used them. I have no idea where they are, and I couldn't find them. But I did mention that before we left out. But Lindy had said, oh, no problem. You know, we've got phones we can just call. Well, based on that, I assumed And this is a really bad thing to do, is to assume. I assumed that when Lindy said, hey, you know what, we could just call, that meant she had, like I have, like a phone system where in your dash, you just, if someone calls you, you just hit it and you can just talk hands-free. I didn't realize she didn't have that, because many of the vehicles have that now. And I thought when she said we can just call, any problems, we'll just call. Well, I couldn't just call her because she could only use the phone, which is not hands-free, and and it's illegal. But even if it weren't illegal, it was just too overwhelming for her to try and dig into her purse, get the phone out, it was just dangerous. So don't assume that you're going to communicate one way when the other person is communicating a different way. How that came into play too was somewhere in Utah, I took over driving initially for that day. I kind of had an idea of how often Lindy needed to stop. And I had planned out, well, we'll stop in Salt Lake City because that should be close enough and we can get gas and everything else. Well, as we're on the way to Salt Lake City, when you're in the lead, you kind of look back every few minutes to check and make sure the person is still behind you. Well, I started looking back, and after a few times, I didn't see Lindy. So I'm thinking, well, no big deal. She just got maybe a little behind me, which I had gotten when I was following her, but I'd always catch up. So 5 minutes later, I still don't see Lindy. 5 minutes later, so now it's been 10 or 12 minutes, and I still don't see Lindy. So I thought, something may be wrong. Maybe she had a flat tire. Maybe I didn't know, but I was starting to get worried, really worried. So I pull over to the side of the road, and I'm at the side of the road about 5 minutes or so, and I don't have a call from her. I don't have anything. And I'm getting really, really worried. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to need to go back and backtrack and try and find her. And at that point, I thought, I don't care. I'm going to telephone her. So I telephoned her, and she's like, oh, no problem, no problem. My wire came loose on my cable on my solar. It's, I don't know. And and so I had to pull over and I had to check it and I did this and that. So, and then a minute or so later, she goes, I'm almost at, I told her what exit I was at. She goes, oh, I'm coming up there. But meanwhile, about 15 minutes has passed and I'm looking, not finding her. So we agreed, and this is something we should have agreed upon up front, and we didn't. We agreed that anytime either one of us had to pull over for something that was going to take more than a couple seconds, like something fall down, you got to pull over to put it back up, or like kettles, he jumped over and I had to pull over to hook him up and got right back on. But if it's going to be longer than that, like 5, 10, 15 minutes, call the person and let them know I'm on the exit, or text them and let them know I've pulled over, I'm on the exit, and then make arrangements to where you will meet up downstream. We didn't do these things, and that really added to each of us, just kind of suffering on the trip and frustration. But by the third day, we kind of realized the things that we hadn't gone over. And we sat down, we went over them, we planned them. And I had scheduled, even though we said 5 days, I had scheduled it so we didn't have to be there or need to be there till the 31st. So we had an extra day. So at that point, like I told Lindy, you know what? I don't care if I don't do any interviews at Incredible Tiny Homes. I don't care if I don't see anything. The only 2 things I really have to do is I have to interview Barry. Those of you who've seen the fabulous sprinter that this 78-year-old man built out when he was 76. Well, he was driving all the way from Florida to meet me at Incredible Tiny Homes. So I had to meet him, and I needed to meet him by the 31st. And then I had to be back to pick up Jessica to get her back to school by the 10th, by the 11th. And I said, you know what? Other than that, anything else can go by the wayside. And once I, let go of everything and just said, the real commitment that I have made is Barry and getting my daughter back to school, it just took a huge load off my shoulders. And I think it was a load off Lindy's too. But again, the 3 things I'm going to tell you that you really need to do. Talk about the differences in your personalities, in your travel style, and what you really want to do. Talk about how often you need to stop. If one person wants to stop every 45 minutes, the other one wants to stop every 3 hours, maybe you can stretch it to an hour and 15 minutes and take it down from 3 hours. But you need to talk about that. Then talk about where it is you plan to be at the end of each day and how flexible is that. And, you know, we ended up not staying at any of the stops that we had scheduled, and that's okay. As long as I know that, then en route, I'm rescheduling other stops. And that's easy to do. But just communicate. And by day 3, we had got it in a groove. The fourth thing I want to say is, you know what? You may have someone who's a really, really good friend. And when you go down all this list of things, you may decide, you know what? We're too dissimilar and our travel styles are too dissimilar that maybe we should just meet up someplace or meet somewhere else. And maybe we shouldn't take trips where we're traveling together. And you know what? That's okay. Nothing says you have to travel with an individual. You can meet them somewhere. So you have the freedom to do what you want. But I just wanted to give you these tips so that you could, if you're going to travel with someone, especially if you haven't done it before, you can be prepared in advance. Don't make assumptions. Don't assume that, how you're going to communicate. Talk it out. Don't assume that because you do things one way, they're going to do it that way, or because something makes sense to you, that it's going to make sense to them. Just talk each and every point out, which works for me because I'm Felix. I like talking each and every point out, even with someone who, is not such a talker on each and every point out. You really do have to. This is a place that you do have to go Felix on them. But, she's out doing her thing. But we had talked about that too, that when we got here, we would each do our thing. We didn't have to stay glued to each other's side. And that's one thing you need to talk about too. Because one person may be expecting, oh, we're going to stay and we're going to do everything together. And if you're planning to go out, venture out, and they're wanting to do everything with you, that could be a problem. But fortunately, that's one thing we did talk about. And she's out doing Gatlinburg. I'm going to be doing somewhere else and some interviews. So the question you may be asking, has it worked out? Yeah, it has worked out. And we're having a great time. We're not going to be going back together because I need to take the northern route because I have to go to San Francisco Bay Area to pick up Jessica. She has to go somewhere else, which the northern route really doesn't make sense for her. Plus, I have a time frame. I have to be back to pick up my daughter. And she has, no time frame. She can be back whenever she wants to. So she's going to travel at a much slower pace, which will work a lot better for her. So we won't be traveling back together, but we've learned a lot. We have certainly learned a lot on this trip. And the most important thing is our friendship has endured and is intact. And that's really all that matters in the end, isn't it? All right, so hopefully this is helpful to you if you're going to be traveling with someone you haven't traveled with before. And I will see you down the road. Stay tuned. I am going to be doing a live today and some tours. And oh, you do not want to miss the tour of Barry's minivan. He's selling it, by the way. And where I'm going to be doing the live from, that lady Teresa is selling her tiny home. So lots of things going on. All right, I'll see you later. May your journeys be filled with joy and blessings. Bye-bye.